My name is Saw, and this is the story of how my husband, Dean, thought he could outsmart me. It all began with whispers in the dark, bank transactions I never made, and a name I'd never heard before, Ilya Morrow. Dean wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to take everything. But he underestimated me. He thought I'd crumble. Instead, I moved first. I protected what was mine. And 1 week later, his entire plan backfired spectacularly. But the worst part wasn't just the betrayal, it was how long he'd been planning it, how many lies he'd told, and how far he was willing to go to destroy me. That night, I woke up to an empty bed. The cold sheets beside me told me Dean had been gone for a while. At first, I thought maybe he'd gone to the bathroom or grabbed a glass of water. But as I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, I caught the faint sound of his voice, low, hushed, careful. The hallway light was off, but a sliver of moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows across the floor. My stomach twisted as I followed the sound just a little longer. She doesn't suspect anything yet. I stopped mid-step, my breath caught in my throat. Dean's voice was smooth, reassuring, like he was calming someone down. My heart pounded against my ribs. Who the hell was he talking to? I stood there, straining to hear more, but the words that followed were muffled. His tone dropped to barely above a whisper. My fingers curled into fists. This wasn't some late-night work call. Dean never whispered on work calls, hell, he never even cared if I overheard his conversations before. My mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. After a few seconds, I heard his footsteps approaching. I barely had time to dart back to the bedroom before he rounded the corner. My pulse hammered as I slid under the covers, feigning sleep. A moment later, I felt the bed dip. His weight shifted beside me, but I kept my breathing steady. A few minutes passed, then he exhaled slowly, relaxed, like nothing had happened. I turned over, blinking up at him. "Where were you?" My voice came out soft, groggy, like I'd just woken up. "Bathroom," he muttered without hesitation, a lie. "And the phone call?" Dean barely flinched. "Just a client. Had to smooth out some details for a case." I stared at him, watching for any sign of hesitation. He met my gaze, unreadable as always. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe it really was work. But that whisper, the sentence, "She doesn't suspect anything yet," I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to roll over. My mind was screaming at me, but I ignored it. Not tonight. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up before Dean. He was still fast asleep, his arm draped across the pillow where my head should have been. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and padded barefoot to the kitchen. I didn't usually check our bank accounts. Dean handled most of the finances, and I'd never given it much thought. But something felt off. I scrolled through the transactions. My stomach tightened. $500. $1,200. $750. $2,000. A dozen withdrawals over the past 3 months, all relatively small, but frequent enough to raise a red flag. Dean and I shared expenses, mortgage, utilities, groceries, but we also had separate accounts for personal spending. These transactions weren't for bills. Weren't for investments. And definitely weren't for anything we'd discussed. I took a shaky breath, my hands tightening around my phone. Behind me, I heard footsteps. I quickly locked my screen and turned to see Dean leaning against the doorway, rubbing his neck. "Morning," he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. "What's for breakfast?" I said. I was about to ask him the same thing. He smirked, stepping forward to pour himself coffee. "Guess it's your turn then." I watched him take a sip, his free hand resting on the counter. "I checked our bank account this morning." Dean froze for half a second, just long enough. His grip tightened around the mug before he forced a chuckle. "There are a lot of small withdrawals," I said. "Things I don't recognize." He barely hesitated. "Just small investments. A few business opportunities." Dean nodded, setting his cup down. Nothing to worry about. Short-term gains, that's all. He was lying. I knew it. I just didn't know why. The rest of the day, I tried to shake the unease. But Dean wasn't helping. He was glued to his phone, taking calls in the other room. His screen was always face down when he set it on the table. And every time I looked at him, I felt like there was a wall between us, one that hadn't been there before. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't quiet down. Dean had always been confident, smooth, a man who knew how to talk his way out of anything. But I'd been with him long enough to know when something was off. And something was definitely off. I turned to face him. He was already asleep, his breathing steady, his face calm, like a man with nothing to hide. I wasn't convinced. A voice in my head whispered the words I'd been trying to push away all day. Am I being paranoid? Or is something really wrong? The doubt refused to fade even as the morning light filtered through my window. I had spent the entire night tossing and turning, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Dean's voice from the night before still echoed in my mind, casual, dismissive, yet calculated. The kind of tone someone uses when they're hiding something in plain sight. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I moved through my routine. Coffee tasted bitter, and the silence of the apartment pressed against me like a weight. I told myself I wouldn't let Dean's words from the night before get to me, but deep down, doubt clawed at my thoughts. Then Dean walked into the kitchen, casually sipping his coffee like nothing had changed. He glanced up and smiled, that same smooth smile he always wore when he wanted to disarm me. "Morning, babe," he said, pressing a quick kiss to my temple. I stiffened. His touch used to comfort me, but now it felt like a calculated move in some twisted game. "I was thinking," he continued, "maybe we should get our financials in order. Just in case, emergencies." My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. Financials? Suddenly, his interest in my personal accounts felt suspicious. We always kept our finances separate, joint accounts for bills, yes, but personal savings were my own business. Financials? I echoed carefully. "Yeah," he said, leaning against the counter and sipping his coffee. "Do you have a full list of your accounts, passwords, assets, that kind of stuff? We should keep everything in one place." His eyes flickered just for a second. That small twitch didn't escape me. I swallowed, forcing a neutral expression. "I guess I could put something together." Dean nodded, like it was no big deal. Then, just as quickly, he changed the subject. But my mind was already racing. This wasn't about us. It wasn't about emergencies. Dean was preparing for something. And whatever it was, he didn't want me to see it coming. That evening, Dean was uncharacteristically relaxed. He laughed at the TV, scrolled through his phone like nothing was wrong, even suggested ordering takeout. He was playing the role of the doting husband perfectly. And that's what made my skin crawl. Something had shifted in him. The way he walked, the way he spoke. It was too easy, too well rehearsed. Then it happened. Dean got up to take a shower, leaving his phone on the coffee table. He never left his phone unattended. Ever. I stared at it, my pulse quickening. The screen was face down, just like it had been for weeks. Then, as if the universe was throwing me a lifeline, a notification lit up the screen. A text message. From a name I didn't recognize, Ilya Morrow. I didn't have time to think. My hand shook as I tilted the screen just enough to read the message preview. "Just make sure she stays in the dark, almost there." My breath hitched, chest tightening so fast it hurt. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in. Who the hell was Ilya Morrow? And what did almost there mean? My finger hovered over the screen for half a second, just long enough for the wildest thoughts to flash through my mind. Was this another woman? Was Dean planning to leave me? Was he hiding money? Panic shot through me. I placed the phone back exactly where it had been and sank into the couch, gripping my knees to keep my hands from shaking. A minute later, Dean strolled back into the room, towel drying his hair. I forced myself to look at him. He was so calm, so at ease, completely unaware I had just seen something I wasn't supposed to. "Did you decide on dinner?" he asked, ruffling his hair. I swallowed hard. "Not yet." He grabbed his phone without a second glance, unlocking it effortlessly. No hesitation. Like there wasn't a damn thing to worry about. But I knew better now. I spent the rest of the night trying to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe Ilya was a colleague. A business partner. Maybe keeping me in the dark was about something completely different, something innocent. But deep down, I knew better. The pieces were clicking together, one by one. The secrecy. The money disappearing. The call in the middle of the night. The sudden interest in my finances. I should have confronted him right then and there. But if I was right, if Dean was really hiding something this big, I needed proof. Real proof. So instead, I kept my mouth shut. I let him kiss me goodnight. Let him slip under the covers like nothing was wrong. Then I lay there, gripping my phone, whispering into the dark. Who the hell is Ilya Morrow? The next morning, that question haunted me. It gnawed at my every thought as I moved through my routine like a ghost going through the motions. Dean sat across from me at breakfast, scrolling through his phone perfectly at ease. I wondered if he had any idea I had seen that message. If he did, he was a damn good actor. But then, as if sensing my suspicion, he looked up and smiled. "Hey babe," he said, "can you sign something real quick?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Sign what?" I asked, keeping my voice light. "Just some financial updates for tax purposes," he said, sliding a document across the table. His tone was casual, but his fingers drummed against the table in an uneven rhythm, a tell I recognized immediately. I picked up the papers, stomach tightening as I skimmed through the first page. Legal jargon filled the document. But once I reached the last page, it became painfully clear. Property transfer agreement. My pulse pounded in my ears. My assets. My savings. Even the condo. Everything would be moved into his name. I forced myself to look up. Dean was watching me, a careful smile plastered on his face. "Dean," I said, voice too controlled. "What is this?" His smile didn't falter. "It's just a precaution, babe. A legal convenience. Nothing changes between us." I stared at him, my grip tightening around the paper. "Nothing changes?" "You're asking me to sign over everything to you." "Not everything," he said smoothly, as if that made it better. "Just consolidating things for protection. You know, in case something happens." My hands trembled, not from fear, but from rage. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't me reading into things. This was planned. And he had the audacity to sit across from me and act like it was nothing. I placed the document back on the table, slow and deliberate. Then I met his gaze. "I'm not signing this." His smile twitched. His jaw clenched for a fraction of a second before he let out a short laugh. Don't be dramatic. It's just paperwork." I held my ground. "Then why are you so eager for me to sign without reading it?" His expression hardened. "You really don't want to do this, Saw." He leaned in slightly, voice low and controlled. But underneath it was a warning. A threat. I met his gaze unflinching. "Is that a threat, Dean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back, arms crossed, expression morphing into something dangerously unreadable. The smirk he'd worn moments ago faded, replaced with unsettling calm. "I just think you're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. His voice was too smooth. Too measured. I swallowed my anger, keeping my expression neutral. He still thought he was in control. That I was just another move on his carefully planned chessboard. I let the silence stretch. Watching him, the way his fingers tapped idly against the table, the slight twitch in his jaw when I didn't respond. He was waiting for me to react. To get emotional. To panic. To break. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. So I smiled just enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "You know what, Dean?" I said lightly, standing up and gathering the papers. "You're right. I did need to think about this." His eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't expecting that. But I had already turned away, walking to the kitchen and placing the documents neatly on the counter. I wasn't going to argue. Not now. Not yet. Because now, I was the one in control. That night, Dean acted as if nothing had happened. He moved through the house like we were still a happy couple, making himself a drink, watching the news, scrolling through his phone, calm and collected. But I knew better. The realization settled in my chest like a heavy weight. This was never about saving our marriage. Dean wasn't trying to fix things, he was setting up his exit, and he wanted to take everything with him. The next morning, I found him in the living room, sipping his coffee as if he didn't have a single worry in the world. But when I sat down across from him, he immediately sensed something had shifted. "We need to talk," he said, setting his cup down deliberately. I tilted my head. He exhaled like it was difficult for him, like he was the one struggling. "I think we should separate." There it was. His voice calm but cold, every word measured. "It's not working anymore," he continued, "even you have to see that." I stared at him, unmoving. He wasn't asking for a divorce. He was telling me it was happening. I let a beat pass, then another. "You've been planning this, haven't you?" A flicker of something crossed his face, gone before I could name it. "It's for the best, Sa. We've grown apart." Grown apart. That was his excuse. I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "You mean you want out, but you want to make sure you don't leave empty-handed." His lips pressed into a thin line. He didn't deny it. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the nearest object across the room. But I didn't. Because something inside me had shifted. A steel resolve I didn't know I had. So I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. Then, as calmly as I could, I said the words that would change everything. "I already moved my assets." Dean's entire posture stiffened. His breath hitched, just barely noticeable. "What do you mean?" His voice was too sharp, too controlled. I smiled slowly and deliberately. "Exactly what it sounds like." His jaw clenched. I saw it then. The moment he realized he had lost. He had spent months orchestrating this, setting up every little detail to ensure he came out on top. But he had underestimated me. And he hated that. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, Dean exhaled sharply and stood up. He grabbed his coffee, took a slow sip, then turned to me with a look that sent ice through my veins. His smile returned, but this time it was colder. Calculated. "You're going to regret this, Sa." I wasn't sure if it was a threat or a desperate bluff. Either way, I was ready. Dean had played his hand. Now it was my turn. The morning air felt heavier than usual as I moved through my routine. Coffee tasted bitter. The silence of the apartment pressed against me like a stone. I told myself I wouldn't let his words get to me. But then, there was a knock at the door. Sharp. Measured. Official. I set my coffee down and took a breath before opening it. A man in a navy blazer stood on the other side, holding a thick envelope. "Sa Keller?" He extended the envelope, expression blank. "You've been served." My fingers tightened around the documents as I watched him walk away. The weight of the envelope felt heavier than it should have been. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. Still, I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table, exhaling sharply before sliding my nail under the flap. I pulled out the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. I skimmed down the page, eyes landing on the financial demands. Dean wasn't just leaving. He wanted half of everything. The condo. The car. 50% of our shared assets. And, because he had the audacity, spousal support. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Of course, he thought he could take everything. He'd been planning this for months. Probably longer. The man I married was cold. But this was calculated. The smell of polished wood and freshly printed documents filled the air as I sat across from my attorney. She flipped through the papers, barely suppressing a smirk as she reached the financial breakdown. Well, she said, tapping her nails against the desk, he's got nothing. I raised a brow. Just like that? She glanced up, amused. Just like that. You moved everything into a trust before he filed. That means, legally, he has no access. He can fight for spousal support. But considering your income history compared to his? It's not happening. I let out a slow breath. My shoulders finally releasing the tension I'd been holding since that knock on my door. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly in control. Dean had spent all this time thinking he was orchestrating the game. He had underestimated me. That evening, I had just finished pouring myself a glass of wine when the front door slammed open. I didn't even flinch. Dean stood there. Fury rolling off him in waves. His tie loosened, jaw clenched so tight I swore I heard his teeth grind. You think you're so smart, don't you? His voice was sharp. Venomous. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the way his anger twisted around him like a storm. I think I'm finally protecting myself. His hands curled into fists at his sides. You planned this. I set my glass down, tilting my head. So did you. Silence stretched thick with unspoken accusations. Then finally, he exhaled sharply. His eyes darkened as he muttered. This isn't over. I exhaled slowly. I had won the first battle. But the war had just begun. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sense of relief. Dean had lost his financial grip on me. But I should have known better than to think he would walk away quietly. The first sign of trouble came at work. It started with looks, not the usual passing glances, but lingering stares with whispers that stopped as soon as I entered the room. By mid-morning, my assistant Rachel hesitated before stepping into my office. Hey, I think you should know something, she said, shifting uncomfortably. What is it? I asked, already exhausted. There's a rumor going around, she trailed off, wringing her hands. Just tell me, Rachel. She hesitated, then sighed. People are saying you took money from your joint accounts, that you were laundering funds. I stared at her. The words hit me like a slap. What? I don't believe it, she added quickly. But Dean, he's been talking to people, lawyers, mutual friends. The story is spreading. My stomach twisted. Fury rose inside me like wildfire. Dean wasn't just trying to take my money. He was trying to ruin me. By the time I arrived at my lawyer's office, I was barely holding it together. This needs to stop, I said, slamming the stack of printed screenshots onto the desk. My hands shook with rage. My lawyer Patricia glanced at them and let out a dry chuckle. Well, he's certainly desperate. He's slandering me. Yes, but we can use that. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her pen against her desk. If he's running around making false claims, he's opening himself up to defamation charges. We send a cease and desist first. If he ignores it, we escalate. I clenched my jaw. I don't want this to drag out in court. I just want him to stop. Patricia sighed. He's trying to bait you, Saw. He wants you to react emotionally. Check right. I turned to see Beatrick standing by the door with a knowing look. You can't let him dictate your next move, she said, stepping forward. You react too fast, and he wins. I swallowed my anger and nodded stiffly. But inside, I was seething. Dean wanted a fight. He was about to get one. I found him at La Rue, one of the city's most exclusive restaurants, laughing over drinks with two colleagues. Seeing him there, completely unfazed, as if he hadn't spent the past few days dragging my name through the mud, made my blood boil. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't scream. I didn't need to. I simply walked up to the table, leaned down, and whispered. "You have no idea what you've just started." Dean's smirk faltered for a split second before he masked it with an easy grin. "Let's see what you've got, then." I had given him one last warning. Now I was done playing fair. Dean had spent weeks trying to manipulate, intimidate, and control me. He had underestimated me at every turn. Now, after failing to take my money and after smearing my name, he was taking one final shot. A desperate man is a dangerous one. I was halfway through my morning coffee when my phone rang. "Patricia," I answered, sensing the urgency before she even spoke. "You need to come in." My lawyer said, without preamble. Dean just filed a motion for a full financial audit. The word sent a sharp jolt through my body. I set my mug down carefully, inhaling deeply. "On what grounds?" Patricia exhaled. "He's claiming you mismanaged joint funds and that you owe him a financial settlement." It's complete nonsense. But that's not the point. Of course it's not. "He's trying to drain me," I muttered. "Legal fees. Time. Stress. He knows he can't win, so he wants to wear me down." Exactly. A sharp bitterness curled in my chest. Dean never played to win outright. He played to exhaust his opponent. Not this time. "I'll be there in an hour," I said before hanging up. By the time I walked into Patricia's office, she already had Dean's motion spread across her desk, annotated in red. "Here's the good news," she said, looking up. "He doesn't have a single piece of legitimate evidence." The bad news? This could still drag out for weeks, maybe months if the court entertains his tactics. I clenched my fists. "What's our next move?" "We counterfile and request an immediate dismissal," she said. "We also demand that he pay for all legal costs if the court deems this a stall tactic." I smirked. "Let's do it." 2 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from Dean in a courtroom. He was dressed sharp, his tie a little too tight. His smirk barely concealed. He thought this was his moment. His lawyer stood. "First, Your Honor, my client has reason to believe that Mrs. Keller improperly moved assets to avoid a fair divorce settlement. We request a full forensic audit of all financial transfers made in the past 6 months." I didn't react. Didn't flinch. Patricia, calm as ever, adjusted her glasses and stood. "Your Honor, all of my client's financial moves were made before Mr. Keller even filed for divorce. There is no evidence of mismanagement or fraud." She slid a thick binder forward. "Additionally, we request that this motion be dismissed with prejudice and that Mr. Keller be required to cover all legal fees as this is a clear attempt at financial harassment." The judge took their time reviewing the documents, expression unreadable. The room was tense. Silent. Dean was watching me, waiting for me to squirm. I didn't give him the satisfaction. Finally, the judge looked up. "The court finds no grounds for a full financial audit. The motion is denied. Furthermore, due to lack of evidence, Mr. Keller will be responsible for all legal fees associated with this claim." A sharp clap of the gavel. Just like that, Dean had lost again. Outside the courtroom, Dean walked past me without a word. But as he passed, he muttered just loud enough for me to hear. "You think this is over? Just wait." I had won this round. But I knew Dean still had one last move left. Men like him don't walk away quietly. They don't accept defeat. They regroup, rest, strategize. And come back with something even worse. Dean had been plotting this too long to let it end here. The call came the next morning. We have a problem, Patricia said. I gripped the phone tighter. What now? There was a pause, then the sound of papers shuffling. Dean and Ilya have filed a formal complaint. They're accusing you of financial fraud. According to their evidence, you've been falsifying financial records for months. I felt the air leave my lungs. If this accusation stuck, I wouldn't just lose money. I could be facing actual legal consequences. They submitted documents, Patricia continued, voice tight. If the court takes this seriously, you'll be forced into a criminal investigation. The world tilted slightly. I pressed my fingers against my temple, willing myself to stay calm. And the documents? Are they real? A scoff on the other end. Absolutely not. But they're good. Someone doctored them. Well, of course. Ilya. The invisible hand guiding Dean's every move. But Patricia added, I had beat Rick take a look at them before calling you. And she found something. A flicker of hope. She recognized the timestamps on the financial transfers. Someone forged them. But they didn't realize one key detail. Those accounts didn't even exist when those transactions supposedly took place. I let out a sharp exhale. That was it. That was the mistake that would ruin them. My fear burned away, replaced by something sharper. Dean wanted a war. Fine. I was about to end it.